All right. Good evening, all you people who can't hear me very well. So, as you recall, we do different things on different Tuesdays, Thursdays, rotating this. This is the Thursday we talk about women's stuff. And I've spent most of the time bringing forward poems from China and India. I've got another book I'm going to be exploring, which is this one, The Hidden Lamp, which is a modern collection of women's koans. It's just a wonderful book. So let me talk about why I'm bringing that forward and just a little bit about the book, and then we'll jump into it. And then I do have another book that it should be arriving this weekend, which is a Tibetan female teacher that I'm really looking forward to. That came to me from Jan Willis. So koans, you know all about koans. We've been talking about koans for several months now. These really pithy exchanges between these crusty medieval Chinese monastics that you take a line from, you sit with, and you use that to just penetrate, to wake up, to have kensho. They're almost all male stories, of course, because the culture at the time was it's all men. Can't wake up unless you're a man. Men are in charge, women don't matter. This is a book that was pulled together about 10 years ago by two American women, and it is a collection of 100 stories. And they are family stories, you might want to call them, but they're koans. And they're koans that intentionally have much more of a female flavor, many more female characters in them. And they are just simply wonderful. And the distinction here is it's wonderful to have stories, koans, that have female players and are selected intentionally because they have female players. These koans also have commentaries on them, not by the original compiler, but they've invited 100 contemporary women teachers to write one per koan on each of these 100 koans. So you've got this diversity, and there's much more of a collaborative and connected feel with the way this book is brought together than there is with this typical male structured teaching. So I'm going to go first here. I'm going to go to the introduction, or the foreword. The foreword is written by Norman Fisher, who is the abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center, and therefore he's one of the more prominent Soto Zen figures in the country. So in his introduction, or in his foreword, he says the following: the traditional koan collections often make reference to two opposing but complementary teaching styles, the grasping way and the granting way. The grasping way, the withholding way, gives you nothing because there is nothing to give. Whatever there is to be gotten must be hard won through struggle. This is the way of the solitary hero. The granting way is the kindly way of the clear and helpful teaching, in which even your confusion and suffering is part of the path. Practice always takes place in the context of others, so awaken is not something you get so much as the relief you experience when you recognize that your life is always right, even when it is difficult, and always shared. So it goes on a little bit. The classical collections, although it talks about these, seem not to reflect this. At least for the Western reader, they're much more the grasping style, and the granting style seems absent. But included here in this collection are not only the long missing stories of women, but along with them a spirit and attitude of open-handed teaching, and the commentaries and the commentaries and the text as a whole reflect. So and I find that very much to be the case in this collection. It's very much more open, it's much more inviting, it's much more conversational, it's much less combative. We've talked about this very masculine style of most Buddhist teachings over time in the past. So by way of getting this going, I'm going to go back to this old tome, my favorite, the Gateless Gate. And in doing this, I don't want to diminish or disparage this text in any way. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I've read it many times. I get much great value out of it, and we will continue to use it in Thursdays, and we will continue to get a lot out of it. But I bring it up to draw the distinction between these two styles of teaching. So the first koan in this collection runs thus. A monk once asked Master Joshu, "Has a dog the Buddha nature or not?" And Joshu said, "Moo." So remember, as we've said before, this is a monk who's travelled halfway across China in straw sandals to visit Joshu, who's got this temple on top of a mountain with holes in the wall. It is cold. This quest for enlightenment is the most important thing in this monk's life. And he's gone all the way there. He's encapsulated this quest in this pithy question that he's going to ask this master, who is inaccessible and remote and is a lofty peak himself. And so he summons up his courage and he asks the master, "Does a dog have Buddha nature or not?" Of course a dog has Buddha nature. That's the whole point. But what is Joshu going to say to him that helps him crack open enlightenment? Joshu says, "Moo!" He barks it out like a dog, and moo means no. It's a negation. It's a cutting off. So this is this very combative, grasping, withholding style of teaching. The commentary: in studying Zen, one must pass the barriers set up by ancient Zen masters. For the attainment of the incomparable Satori, one has to cast away the discriminating mind. Those who have not passed the barrier and have not cast away the discriminating mind are all phantoms haunting trees and plants and so on. So you get the point. Wonderful, wonderful stuff, but it's the grasping style, it's this combative style. You've got to take it on and you've got to wrestle with it. And it is a solo quest. You wrestle with it, you go present your answer to the master, and then either approve, he or she, classically he of course, part of the point, and he or she will either approve or disapprove. And if approved, you just get the next one, and if disapproved, you go back and you have to start all over again. So instead of that, we have koans that read like this, and I'm just going to read a few of these koans. The first section of this is called Clapping Her Hands and Laughing, which is stories of seeking and awakening. So I'm going to read a handful of these and then just a couple of sentences out of the commentaries that are put together so we can get a flavour of what this is about. And then we will discuss. Enoja was a great queen at the time of the Buddha. Her husband, King Mahakapina, journeyed to hear the Buddha's teaching and became a monk, along with many of his attendants. He sent a messenger back to his court with the news, and when Enoja was asked if the king had sent a message for her, the messenger said, "He gives all his royal power to you. Enjoy the glory and pleasure." But instead, Enoja said, the Buddha could not have arisen only for the benefit of men, but for women as well. So she and her attendants also made the journey to hear the Buddha and to attain. Mahakapina, now a monk, was present, but the Buddha, using his magic powers, made the king invisible. When the queen and her attendants heard the Buddha speak, they all became stream enterers. Stream enterer is the Pali vernacular, it's the Theravadan vernacular for the early stages of enlightenment. The first of 4 levels of Buddhist realization. Then the Buddha asked Enoja, "Would you rather seek the king or seek the nature of the self?" Without hesitation, she replied, "The nature of the self." So the koan itself feels just more inviting. What's this about? There's not something being held up for us to wrestle with. Which would you rather, seek the king or seek the nature of the self? The nature of the self. So Sandy Boucher is the person who wrote the commentary. And she talks about how the Buddha set up this test when asking her this question. And she reflects, how many of us have faced this choice between a relationship and what we knew to be the path of growth and clarity? In college, my brilliant French major roommate was dating a grad student. When she won a Fulbright grant to study in France for a year, her boyfriend instead insisted she refuse the opportunity and stay at home with him. Thrilled by the romance of it all, I supported her decision when she gave in to him. Not too many years later, involved in my own passionate love affair, I turned down a fellowship in a prestigious graduate writing program for the sake of romance. choosing the familiar path of short-term gratification. It was a move that turned out badly on several fronts. So here we have a story which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us here are in male bodies and 1 is in a female body. The 5 of us in male bodies probably have a harder time relating to what's going on here, but we can from afar see that this is a normal situation for a woman to be in, subservient, sacrificing these wonderful opportunities for the sake of the man. And so we've got this teed up here in this koan, with the man, the husband, as an observer being made invisible by the Buddha's magical power so he can see this happening. And the queen is given the opportunity to decide, would she rather play this game of civilization and culture and male-female hierarchy, or would she rather seek the nature of the self? And she went for the nature of the self. So that this is a totally different flavour. The koan itself and then the commentary. There's the female perspective, but there's a different flavour of how this comes across. It's much gentler, much more inviting. We're left there to talk about and explore together in a collaborative way, what is this nature of the self? And why do we live in a world where so many people find themselves turning away from that to play these games of short-term gratification which turn out badly on several fronts? So the next one, Joko Beck, who was a very well-known Buddhist teacher. Joko Beck had finished a talk and asked if there were any questions. A young man raised his hand and bluntly asked, "Are you enlightened?" Her response was immediate. Laughing out loud, she said, "I hope I never should have such a thought." So again, it's just altogether gentler. And the commentator, the person writing a reflection on this koan, as with the others, is about 2 or 3 pages long. But the piece that I will read out, she says, my own encounters with Joko, and she studied with Joko for quite some time, I believe, were just as unexpected and penetrating. Early in our spiritual work together, when I was a single parent juggling 3 jobs in a full-time graduate program, she asked me what had brought me to Zen practice. I knew that this was not a casual question. For weeks I reflected on it. And finally I came into the private interview, met her piercing gaze and said, truthfully, I just want to be a better mother for my son. She tartly replied, well, that's a story. And so this, what's her name? I'm sorry. Peg. Peg says, I was startled into wonder and for just a bit completely lost my bearings. And then she realized, I knew maybe she was right. My story was quite suddenly clear. The core belief that I was perpetually failing at some performance of being a good mother, despite having neither models nor even any idea what such a person might be. So again, there's a different structure of the core koan, which is just very much more down to earth, dismissive of the airy-fairy stuff, and much more into just grounding this in real life. And then the commentary really brings it home and invites conversation around how we can live a life without getting caught up on the stories, live this clean, empty of preconceptions, empty of the preconception the young man brought when he raised the question in the first place. Are you enlightened? He had no idea what that meant. If he did, if he knew, he wouldn't have had to ask, because he would have known. So empty of all of these preconceptions. So it's an invitation into just a different relationship with the koan and a different relationship with our lives. So here's the last one I'll read, and then I will stop and we will discuss any of the koans or just the whole thing together as you will. In China and Japan, many millions of Buddhists have been, and in Japan still are, devotees of the Pure Land doctrine. According to this doctrine, a bodhisattva made a great vow, which in time fulfilled itself as the manifestation of the Buddha Amitabha, infinite light, who created a Pure Land paradise in the West for those who would take his name with faith. From this Pure Land it was easy to attain final nirvana. An old lady of this faith was walking along the road when she met a Zen master, who said to her, "On your way to the Pure Land, eh, Granny?" She nodded. "Holy Amitabha's there waiting for you, I expect." She shook her head. "Not there? The Buddha's not in his Pure Land? Where is he then?" She tapped twice over her heart and went on her way. The Zen master opened his eyes wide in appreciation and said, "You are a real Pure Lander." And for what it's worth, that actually is how I've read many. There are real practices like that in the Pure Land. The serious practice does look like that. So, I'm going to read one more. I lied. I'm going to read one more. One day, a nun asked Mansyong Sunim, "How do I cultivate the way of the Buddha?" "No cultivation," answered Mansyong. The nun persevered. "How then can I obtain release from birth and death?" "Who changed you to birth and death?" Mansyong answered in return. Again, different style. It's not, there is no birth and death. Who changed you? It's a question. It's inviting something more. It's inviting engagement. Interestingly, Mansyong Sunim is a well-known Korean male teacher. So there are male teachers in here, but it's the style. There's a nun, but there's a style here. So what I'm going to read here, at the end of these, the structure is you've got the koan, then you've got the commentary by this contemporary female Buddhist teacher, and then at the end, in lieu of what is typically a capping verse, there are some questions. And the questions here are the elements that caught my eye. Could you say to a person in prison, sentenced to die for a crime she didn't commit, who changed you to birth and death? Is it possible that our desire for spiritual understanding could prevent us from realizing spiritual understanding? How different that is than the capping verse for the first koan I started with out of here. The capping verse here. Again, not disparaging this capping verse, but it's just coming at it from a totally different style of teaching, a totally different style of engagement with the koan. The dog, the Buddha nature, the truth is manifested in full. A moment of yes and no, lost are your body and soul. Instead of that you have, could you say to a person in prison, could you say to a person in prison, sentenced to die for a crime she didn't commit, who changed you to birth and death? So I've not spent as much time with this book as I need to, and I will be spending a lot more, particularly as we work through it together. But I think it's a wonderful book, and it's just such a wonderfully different approach to koans, and a very, more broadly than koans to me, opens up just this very different, open-handed approach to teaching. The generative, generous, giving approach rather than the grasping and the withholding.